This is Dan, and this is the Napkin Academy. And this lesson is going to be a follow-up. This is 6x6 picture type number 6. As you remember, this is the picture that answers the question why, otherwise known as the multivariable plot picture type. And this is the lesson where we're going to move from some theory we saw previously into a real-world example. And we're going to tell one story using everything we know about the entire 6x6 pie at this point, resulting in a multivariable plot. This is a story that I'd like to share with you that took place back in the year of 2008. This is a real-world example. And again, what we're going to do with this is we're going to explore why, the big final question. And in order to do that, you might remember that there are actually two kinds of pictures we can draw. There is a simple picture, which we're going to call the visual equation, and then there's a more elaborate picture, which we're going to call a full-on multivariable plot. And we're going to work on both of those now and see how both of those kinds of pictures can help us answer the question, why is something the way it is? So this story, again, back in 2008, involves, let's call it a story of three circles. And one of those circles is a company called Microsoft. And back in the year of 2008, Microsoft had a market capitalization, so total worth of the company, of about $282 billion. And Microsoft was run by a guy named Steve Ballmer. And there's Steve up there. The second company we want to talk about, a second circle, was a smaller company called Yahoo. And Yahoo in those days had a market cap of about $35 billion. So the sizes of these circles are actually accurately proportional to the total size of those market caps. And of course, Yahoo at that time was run by a guy named Jerry Yang. And one day in 2008, Mr. Ballmer came to Mr. Yang and said, "Hey, I'd like to buy your company. And I'd like to buy your company for about $44 billion. And this went back and forth for a little while. Mr. Yang was kind of excited for a while. Then he said, "Oh, but that's not enough money. I need more money." And this went back and forth and back and forth. And money got bigger and money got smaller. And in the end, nothing happened. But there was a tremendous amount of media pressure, a tremendous amount of media attention focused on this enormous deal. But the question that was never really answered is why? Why was it that Steve Ballmer at Microsoft would want to pay $44 billion for a company that wasn't even, in terms of market cap, worth that? So what was the story that was going on? In order to answer that, we're going to make our two pictures, our simple visual equation and our elaborate multivariable plot. But in order to do those pictures, we're first going to have to add in a third circle. And this is a circle, of course, that was called Google. And even back in the year of 2008, it was pretty much impossible to have a conversation that would talk about Microsoft and Yahoo without adding in Google. So Google, back in that year, had a market cap of about $181 billion. So as we can see, it's much larger than Yahoo, but, two-thirds the size of Microsoft. So we're going to see as we draw our pictures why these three circles are important in a story that originally seems to only talk about two circles. Now, it just so happened that at the time all of this was going on, I was doing a project for a group at Microsoft. And that project involved, doing a lot of our kind of drawing that we're talking about in these lessons. And so with the permission of the executives, I said, look, I'd like to, in my exercise, use the question, what's going on here today? Why is it that you think, employees that I'm working with from Microsoft, why do you think it is that your company might be wanting to buy Yahoo for this enormous amount of money? And can we express that in a very simple visual equation? And, none of this reflected what was actually company policy, but it was just some of the insights from some of the people that were in the company. And they drew a couple of amazing pictures. And one of them looked something like this. They said, well, imagine that Microsoft is a really big fish and that Yahoo is a kind of a small fish. And, here's a very simple little visual equation that says, well, the reason Microsoft wants to acquire Yahoo is because that's simply what happens. Big fish eat little fish. And I thought that was a pretty nice picture. And then someone else drew another one, kind of really insightful. And they said, well, imagine that this is us over here at Microsoft. And we are a really nice flavored kind of ice cream cone. Our business is really good and we're doing really well, but let's face it, what is the thing that would make every ice cream cone even a little bit better would be to have a little cherry on top. So Yahoo represents the cherry, adds a little bit of flavor, and of course the main company is Microsoft. And I thought that's pretty incredible. I mean, can you come up with a better visual equation for describing just sort of how business works? Kind of the big why of business. Well, why? Because it is in the nature of things for the big fish to eat the small fish. It's simply in the nature of things in business to want to add something nice on top of something that's already doing pretty well. It makes the whole thing even better. So I thought, well, these are great visual descriptions, but let's face it, by virtue of simply being these cute little visual equations, they do answer part of the question why, but they don't answer it super effectively, and they certainly don't give us the big reason as why this amount of money. In order to answer that, we're going to have to move on to something more sophisticated and really start to look at the entire plot. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, as we recall, we started this out with 3 circles: Microsoft, Yahoo, and Google. Now, if we were going to try to compare these 3 companies, if we were going to try to figure out why would this one want to buy this one, perhaps in reaction to that one, what do we know about these companies as we look at them? What do we know about these 3 that might make them interesting to compare? Well, one of the things that we know, of course, is that they're all involved in one way or another in software. Okay, fair enough. They're all involved in software. But we could probably go a little bit further than that. What kind of software are these 3 companies involved in? Well, if you think back to that year 2008, each of these companies was involved in a different quantity of products. What I mean by that is Google didn't offer a whole lot. Google offered search tools. Google offered email. Google offered maps. And Google offered some online content aggregation, which let's just call that news. Yahoo at that time, of course, offered something similar. It offered search. It offered email. Yahoo didn't really have maps, but it had something else. We had financial information. We had a lot of media, streaming media, media insight, and we had some commerce available. Now, what's interesting about all those is pretty much all of those, like Google, are all online tools. Now, Microsoft back at that time, what did it offer? Well, it offered a lot of things. Microsoft offered an entire operating system, in the form of Windows, and lots of different forms of Windows, from XP to Vista to probably NT people were still using. So an entire operating system. Microsoft also offered Office, so the whole suite of Office tools. And so we could think about, Word and PowerPoint and Excel and a whole bunch of other tools. And then, of course, Microsoft also offered a lot of collaboration software through things like SharePoint. What else did Microsoft offer? Lots of online, of course, lots of online offerings, roughly similar to some of the things that we saw over here through MSN, through the network. Lots of content. Some commerce, and of course MSNBC and other things, so news and media. And so as we look at this, there are a couple of things that we know. We know that the companies are different sizes. What we refer to that's a variable. That might be variable A, size of company, measured by market cap. Variable B could simply be the number of different products that each company offers. And there's one other thing that's pretty interesting if we look at those. How do these three companies, let's call this variable C, how do they actually earn money? How do they earn money? So in the case of Google, well, Google doesn't charge its users anything. So if you're a Google user, what do you pay? You pay nothing. You pay no money at all because Google makes all of its money through its advertisers. Those advertisers, of course, coming out of search and putting ads in email and things like that. Yahoo, similar. Yahoo, how much does Yahoo charge for its users? Well, nothing. Yahoo, of course, has an advertising model as well. Yahoo charges nothing. But there's something different here. Microsoft, how much does Microsoft charge its users? Well, Microsoft charges its users a fair amount. Most of these products, most of these big heavy lifting software products, cost a fair amount of money in licensing fees. The user pays to use these things. I don't know how happy the user is about that, but the user pays and pays a certain amount of money. So we've now identified three variables that we could start to map together. Size of company, number of products, software products that the company offers, and price that those products cost to the user. So what does this tell us in terms of making a multivariable plot? Well, remember how we make a multivariable plot? We start by picking a variable, and let's call this number of software products. We're going to compare our three companies across that axis. And then we're going to add another one. And on this one, what else do we identify? This is our variable A. Let's call this one variable C over here, which is going to be cost to user, from zero cost up to fairly substantial cost. Okay, so what are we starting to understand now? Well, we've got the beginnings of a multivariable plot in the sense that we've got our main axis system. That's how we start any MVP. So let's go ahead then and map in our companies. And let's say this is few software products, and this is many, many software products. Now, where in this axis does Microsoft sit in the year 2008? Well, Microsoft offers many products, and it offers them at a reasonably high fee for the user. So Microsoft is going to sit up here. And where, for example, does Google sit on this? Well, Google at that time offered relatively few products, but they cost nothing to the user. So Google is going to sit down here. And where is Yahoo going to be? Well, Yahoo offers a few more products than Google does, but they're also free. So Yahoo is going to sit down here too. So now what we're starting to do is create our multivariable plot. We're starting to map out on this axis some things that we know. And let's review really quick. Variable A, number of software products available from few to many, Microsoft on this end, Yahoo and Google on this end. And price to user, Google and Yahoo at 0, Microsoft at fairly high cost to the user. And what was variable B? Remember that one? That was the size of the company by market cap. So let's draw that too. So Microsoft sits up here with a fairly big circle, 282 billion. Google sits down here with a circle that's 2/3 that size, 181 billion. And Yahoo sits down here with a relatively small market cap of 35. So let's take a pause and look at what we've got now. And there we have the beginnings of a really interesting multivariable plot. And before we go too much further, because I can tell you this thing's going to get even busier as we start to layer in even more information, let's do a review of what we've got. And how many variables do we have? Let's count them. We've got variable A, number of products. We've got variable B, size of company. We've got variable C, cost to user. And what we're beginning to see is some way, this is the whole purpose of visual thinking. We're beginning to see emerging some images and ideas that would not have been visible, simply would have been invisible if we'd just been talking about this stuff, because we can see it all here, some picture is starting to emerge. Well, you know what? Let's go ahead and add in another variable, plus one more, and we're going to call this one the variable of time. Because you might remember when we started talking about this story, we said that variable D, time, was in the year 2008. So this is a snapshot of what this world looked like in 2008. But let's do something really interesting. Let's back up in time just a little bit. Let's go back even just 4 years, maybe back to the year 2004. You know what would have happened? Google would have been much smaller than that. Google would have been about that big. Microsoft would have been in the same place and just about equal size before. And Yahoo actually would have been a little bit bigger at that time, back in 2004. So red color, in this case time-wise, now means back in time. So now I've added another variable. And I'm going to add another color, a new color we've never seen in one of my charts before. Let's add blue. Because I want to think about, as we move towards the future, let's think about what might have been happening in the minds of Jerry Yang, Steve Ballmer, folks over at Google in the year 2008 as they were thinking about the future. Because let's face it, if you're Steve Ballmer and you're going to be investing $44 billion in buying a company, you are definitely thinking big time about what's coming down the line. You're definitely thinking about the future. So let's think out some date, I don't know, 2015. Let's pick a time. So in the future, let's look at what some of our business options are, because the fact is, it's clear that Google is growing. And it's probably going to continue to grow, and Microsoft's been staying more or less the same size. I mean, if we just think about the trends shown in the time that we have, we can see that the number one trend is that Google is getting bigger. Yahoo's staying about the same, Microsoft's staying about the same. But there's another trend which is emerging, which has to do with business models. Famous old business models, meaning how do we make our money? How do we make our money? So let's think about this. Is Google, who we now know charges users $0, is Google going to start charging lots and lots of money to users to use its software products? Probably pretty unlikely. Probably not going to happen. That doesn't seem like a very likely business model for Yahoo. And let's think about a business model for Microsoft. Is Microsoft all of a sudden going to start giving away all of its products for free? Move down to $0? Well, that also doesn't sound particularly likely. That doesn't seem like it's going to make a lot of business sense for Microsoft. So what we do know, go back to our blue, is that as time is moving, Google is getting bigger and it's adding more and more products. And if you were reading the press, if you were reading about Google back in that year 2008, you knew that they were going to start adding things that would be similar to all of the kinds of tools, or most of the kinds of tools that Microsoft was thinking about, including even such things as an operating system. So all of a sudden, at some point in the future, you're going to find a multivariable plot, which theoretically might look something like this. Microsoft is up here charging lots and lots of dollars for most of its applications. Google is going to be down here charging $0 for its applications. Now, if you're a user, and you think that there might be some rough similarity between the software offerings of these products, which one are you going to choose to use? The one that costs you money or the one that costs you no money? Well, maybe this is maybe this is what Steve Ballmer was looking at and saying, I have to do something because I will not be able to live in a world where the same software offerings are available from a company for free, and with my model where I'm offering them for lots and lots of money. And now I think the real underlying why starts to become clear, because back in the year 2008, what Steve Ballmer, I think, might have been thinking was, if I buy Yahoo, what I actually do is, for the time being, I can put a blockage in the way of this product moving over long enough for me to figure out a way to be able to make my software perhaps online based, perhaps change my entire business model so that I don't find that I've suddenly got a neighbor down here who may be eating everything that I have to offer. And the way to might be able to do that is by purchasing that company right then and buying myself variable D, buying myself some time to figure out a new business model for my entire company. And there you have it. So that is Dan Rome's view, completely uninformed, but based on building this multivariable plot. Point is, I don't have any information that anybody else didn't have. I just created this picture and thought about it and thought, well, is it right or is it wrong? Who knows? But remember, when we used a multivariable plot, test theories and look for something that might be unexpected. And that's exactly what happened with this multivariable plot. And there you have it. That's when we use a multivariable plot and how we create them. So quick and final review for our picture type number 6, the picture that answered the question why, which we now know was a multivariable plot. Gives us an opportunity to see lots of different information, lots of different variables layered together in a way that allows us to see something we had not seen before. And I'd like to summarize with one final little multivariable plot, perhaps derived out of that story we just talked about with Microsoft, Yahoo, and Google. And it has to do with how we make business decisions. Business decisions. And let's see if we can't create a multivariable plot that shows some of those things. Well, business decisions are often small in scale, or they can be very, very big in scale in terms of the amount of money that we're going to spend. And business decisions can be made with a very straight face, either very rational, or sometimes we make business decisions, woohoo, based totally on emotion. And I'm not going to judge anything, but let's say we know that sometimes we make small business decisions that are entirely rational, and sometimes we make big business decisions that are entirely rational. We all know this. Sometimes we make small decisions that might be completely based on emotion, and maybe they're valuable. And sometimes we make really big decisions, really big financial decisions based largely on emotion. And we'll leave it with the question is, from a business perspective, which kind of decisions do we really want to be making?